Kia ora koutou. Thank you for joining us today. Before we start, I'm going to kick us off, open the hui with a karakia. Kia inoi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta. Kia mā taratara ki tai. Kia hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei mauriora. I ngā reo, i ngā mana, raurangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka tū te mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora koutou, welcome to this online hui about a very important kaupapa concerning the management of our freshwater in Te Tai Tokerau. My name is November Wai. I'm the Group Manager of Environmental Services at the Northland Regional Council, and I'll be your MC for this morning. We have a series of speakers today who will be presenting the mahi that we've been doing over the last year or so in respect of the freshwater plan change. Got a slight change of agenda. We were going to have our new chair, Jeff Crawford, open up the hui, but he's unfortunately unable to make it. So I'll be continuing to open the hui until we lead on to our first presenter, Justin Murfitt. He'll be talking about an overview of the plan change and the rationale behind that. Then we have Celia Witihira. She's a representative of our Tāngata Whenau Water Advisory Group, and she'll be providing a perspective around Te Mana me te Māori o Te Wai and the way that has factored into the draft freshwater plan change. Finally, we have our NRC policy specialist, Leon Kiefer, and Leon will be getting into a bit more of the detail around the provisions. And most importantly, at the end of our presentations, we'll be opening up for a Q&A session. Really important that we get your questions in. We've got a panel here to respond to your questions. Oh, and on top of that, we've also got our elected members attending who will also be on the panel. So we've got Councillor John Blackwell and Councillor Marty Robinson, who will also be available on the panel to respond to questions. So I'll just provide a bit of an opening before we launch into our first speaker. So freshwater is a hugely vital and important component of natural resources that we need to manage across the country. Our communities, Tāngata Whenua, central government, have all signalled that fresh water is a vital component to our well-being. We know that our waterways in our region are degraded. The science is telling us that we've got substantial contamination from E. coli and sediment, and also the ecosystem itself that makes up the entirety of our freshwater system is also degraded. Our council needs to find solutions to manage fresh water, and this draft process is an important step to enabling council to understand the views from our communities in respect of freshwater management. A really important kaupapa today is we absolutely recognise that there's been a change of government, and that the government has signalled that there will be a shift in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. Importantly, we don't know what those changes are, but what we do know is that our freshwater systems in Te Tai Tokerau are degraded, and something needs to be done to support improved freshwater outcomes. And so the mahi around that is going to need to continue. And so the feedback we receive through this process is really, really important. And on top of that, we don't know what those changes look like in terms of the NPS, changes to the NPS. So it's really important that we continue on with this process. We continue to hear from our communities, and we continue to learn about how we can manage freshwater in the region. Most importantly, and I've touched on this, we really need to hear from you all. The way we support good decisions at a staff level, and the way we support elected members to make those decisions, is to hear from our communities. And so it's really important that if you've got any questions, if you want to provide feedback, please provide that feedback, because it all supports us to make sure we're finding the right balance in terms of the changes that we're proposing through the draft. Just like to acknowledge our presenters, and thank you everyone for showing up to this hui. And with that, I will hand over to Justin, who will kick off the kōrero. Thank you, Justin.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, Justin Murfitt. I'm a policy analyst with the Regional Council, and I've been working on in the background on this plan change, draft plan change, for a couple of years now. So I'm just going to quickly cover sort of an overview of the plan change itself, and the rationale, what's driving it, and then just summarise some of the sort of big freshwater issues we're grappling with in the region. And then we'll, but ideally you won't spend too much time on this. It's more about your questions, so we'll crack on. So what is it? So the draft freshwater plan change is essentially a package of changes to rules and policies in a regional plan that relate to freshwater, and some draft actions that council could do. It is very much a draft. There are no decisions being made in terms of confirming the rules or the policies or the actions. It is an opportunity for council to test some initial thinking, new concepts and ideas and approaches for freshwater. So the rules have no legal effect at all. One important thing is we are limited in scope to freshwater only. So we can't play with other rules, say discharges to air or the like. And I guess your feedback here is critical to informing what goes into the next round of a proposed plan, which is the more formal step. And the government direction on us as it stands at the moment is to notify a proposed plan into next year. That, as Ruben mentioned, that may change, but we're working with what we've got in front of us at the time. We don't know what the new government's timeframe is for changing the NPS. So yeah, we're tracking on towards the program as it stands for the moment. So what's in it? So the package includes a draft plan change, and that is marked up versions of freshwater rules and policies in our regional plan, and a little bit of content for our regional policy statement as well. There's a draft action plan, which is sort of a summary of some of the things council could do to support improving water quality and the targets and outcomes we're after. It is very much, again, a draft, but we need feedback on that as well, because it's not all about rules. There's things council can support landowners to do, and they could be just as important as the rule package, because rules can't do everything. There's some sort of key sort of documents, summary of the key changes in the plan change. There's one very important discussion document, which I'm sure you all want to have a closer look at, which is have your say on rules around stock exclusion. They aren't rules as such. Council has not confirmed any changes to stock exclusion rules that we currently have in our plan. It is about testing some options and looking for feedback on whether how those options sound or what some alternatives might be. That document's supported with some cost estimates around each of the options that looks at So you're looking at stock exclusion setbacks. The wider the setback, the higher the opportunity cost. So the lost grazing opportunity, the cost of reticulating water, the cost of fencing and planting and the like. It also includes some options around stock on highly erodible land, stock access to the sort of steeper land in Northland, which is generating quite a bit of our erosion and sediment. So some options around that, including some slope-based mapping, which we'll get into more detail later. There's a discussion document around a targeted allocation policy that was a recommendation of our Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group around a shift potentially from a first in, first served approach, which has traditionally been the case under the RMA in terms of allocating water takes. So we'll get into some more detail on that as well. Why it matters, that's a very high-level summary of the key changes as a taster. An important part of the package is a map viewer. That includes some draft maps of highly erodible land. We think the draft plan change is a good opportunity to improve how we identify erosion risk in Northland. We've got a current approach, which is a bit dated. We think slope-based ways of identifying erosion risk is probably a good way to move towards. Slope is a key driver of erosion risk in Northland. But yes, it's we'll get into a bit more detail on that as well. And there's some sort of background documents, a sort of summary of some of the supporting information that we've used to get to this point. And just mention again, we're very lucky to have advice from the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group and a primary sector liaison group in getting to this point. So that they've sort of been giving us some high-level advice as we go through, and we've tried to adopt that where we can. In terms of the process, this slide here is basically the direction from the previous government in the MPS Freshwater in terms of the process. It sets the MPS Freshwater is quite prescriptive, and it's quite challenging, and it's quite complex. So I'll just fly through it real quick, but some key elements in it. The concept of Te Manawa Te Wai is a key theme. That basically sets out a hierarchy where council's decision-making around freshwater has to put the well-being of water bodies first, the needs of people second, and social, economic matters and everything else essentially third. That's quite a shift, and it is quite a challenge. The other key thing in this NPS is the requirement to at least maintain water quality and improve where we're not meeting national bottom lines. It essentially sets out a whole bunch of attributes we need to manage, and some of those have standards that apply across New Zealand that must be met over time. It is complex in terms that it sets out 22 attributes for water quality and ecosystem health. And we need to assess where we sit in the region in terms of those attributes. What's our baseline state? What's the condition compared with those attributes and the band system, the grading system that the MPS sets up? Essentially, we've got to look at that baseline state and then set targets to improve. We must set targets to improve where we're not meeting national bottom lines, and we have a few of those not being met in Northland. So once we've set the sort of targets, the timeframes, how long it's going to take to achieve these improvements, we need to set rules and limits and identify some actions that will help us get there. But we need to talk to the community and Tāngata Whenua and stakeholders as we go, and that's why Council was embarked on this draft. It's not a compulsory requirement to release a draft, but Council was very aware of the implications for landowners, and the opportunity to road test that was very important to Council. So what are the big issues in Northland? Erosion and sediment loss to fresh water, and its sort of destiny ending up in our harbours and estuaries. That's a key one. It's widespread across the region. There's many reasons for it, which I'll explain in a little, but it is quite an intractable problem. So it's sort of a landscape scale issue, and it's going to need landscape scale solutions. E. coli is a measure of microbial or fecal contamination of waterways. It's not a pretty picture in Northland. It is, again, widespread. And we can talk a little bit more on this, the sources and problems, cause and effect in a bit. The other key one we've got is degraded habitats, freshwater habitats or ecosystem health. And that's, again, a widespread issue, particularly where we've lost riparian vegetation. A lot of our aquatic species, freshwater species, are adapted to bush-clad rivers, lots of shade and cooler waters. So we've lost a lot of that riparian cover, and that has impacted, along with water quality issues like sediment and high nutrients in places. So that's another key one. That said, it's not all doom and gloom. Some of the measures in the MPS, the attributes we're required to monitor and manage, we're actually looking pretty good. But these ones aren't such a pretty picture. So just quickly on sediment. As I said, it's a widespread issue. It's impacting on a range of values in Northland, particularly swimming, recreation, and ecosystem health. Visual clarity impairs the ability of animals to feed and breed. When it lands in estuaries, it can smother shellfish beds and affect mahinga kai, food gathering and recreational swimming. Murky, muddy rivers aren't quite as attractive. Can also affect drinking water and the treatment of drinking water. UV treatment doesn't work so well with high sediment loads. So yeah, we've got an issue. On the left-hand side there, that map on the left, that is our baseline state for water, visual clarity of water. It's probably painting a better picture than what's reality, because we don't sample in high flows when we get a lot of our sediment coming down. Probably what's a more telling story is that map of Northland on the right, and you can see the red dots there. Those are our monitored sites. This map is showing an attribute we're required to manage under the MPS, dissolved reactive phosphorus. Now, this is basically an indicator of erosion processes. We have naturally high phosphorus in quite a few parts of Northland. When it erodes, with that geology erodes, it ends up in our waterways. It travels with sediment, so that's a good indicator of the issue. In terms of the sources, land disturbance, things like earthworks, vegetation clearance, use of highly erodible land, particularly where it's in pasture, it's more erodible than it's got woody cover. Another feature in Northland is stream bank erosion. That's quite common and can be up to 50% in cases. So we've got a range of sources, and it's, again, quite an intractable problem. It's going to take time. Obviously, planting takes time to grow, riparian cover, and with it stabilizing erosion-prone land, that takes time. E. coli, this is one that is quite a gloomy picture. It's right across the board. You look at that map of Northland on the left-hand side there, a sea of red, essentially. The red dots are our monitored sites. The sort of wavy red lines are modelled estimates of E. coli. You can see that most of our rivers are in a poor or very poor state, 94% of them. Now, that's not meeting swimmable standards. And while it's widespread, it's perhaps not as difficult to fix in terms of the time frame. It can respond quite quickly, but things like stock exclusion and the controls on E. coli and stuff can be very expensive for landowners. It's costly to fence, all those sorts of things. So the council's very aware of that. And the sources, what we know about the sources are, it's mostly warm-blooded animals, mammals, essentially, cattle, deer, pigs, sheep, goats, and the like. Also seeing signs of humans, failing septic tanks and the like, and waterfowl. But probably the most dominant is ruminants, particularly in sort of intensively grazed areas. So that's a bit of a challenge for Northland. That said, it's also a challenge across New Zealand. We're not alone on this one. And oh yeah, we've set for Ecolo, we've set a target of 2050, and that target isn't to achieve a pristine state, an A state, if you like. It's to meet a minimum contact recreation standard, a C state. So not being incredibly over aspirational here, we're aiming for a sort of a minimum contact recreation standard. In terms of habitat health or ecosystem health for waterways, rivers, a key measure here is macroinvertebrates. It's basically it's a measure of insect life and the abundance and health and variety of them. It's a key indicator of aquatic health of waterways. More than 50% of our monitored sites fail the bottom line in the NPS. It's around 55%. There's 3 measures. This one is the best one. So we're other metrics, we're looking at sort of around 70% failing. So we must improve. That's a directive from the previous government. It's a complex thing to manage. There's multiple influences, as you can imagine. It's affected, by the quality of the water, i.e. sediments and nutrient loads. It's affected by temperature of the water. It's affected by riparian habitat, the amount of planting and shading and the like. So it's a tricky one to manage. Lots of solutions required rather than just one silver bullet. And that's probably a common theme across most of our big issues, is there's multiple solutions needed. So we've got some massive challenges in the region. However, we've got a fairly limited toolbox. In terms of rules, we've got some sort of most valuable players, if you like, that are going to give us the best bang for buck. Controls on land disturbance, that's the things like earthworks, cultivation, and they're designed to manage this loss of sediment to water. Stock exclusions, another one. This one does multiple things. Keeping stock out of waterways limits the amount of disturbance to the waterway beds, the actual habitat, the substrate in the water body. Limits the E. coli contamination, i.e. animals and fecal matter entering the water, and can also limit to some degree, it provides a bit of a filtering function where you've got riparian sort of margins that filter out sediment loss and nutrient loss and the like. Riparian setbacks, they're a key one for Northland. We've lost a lot of our riparian cover around rivers and lakes. It's key for the shading function, the temperature regulation and the like, and also that sort of habitat for plants and animals particularly, and the like, that rely on sort of a land water margin. The other key one here is controls on discharges to land and water, primarily focused on reducing E. coli and to some degree nutrients, which can be an issue in Northland. We're not seeing it as a major, but there are localized areas of nuisance algal growth, particularly when temperatures are high, and that's largely a function of the nutrient load. But it's not all about rules. Council's also keen to test some ideas around how we can support improving water. And some of these are just high-level summary, and again, we can get into more detail, and there's a discussion, a draft action plan that sets these out in a bit more detail. Supporting freshwater farm plans, financial support for planting, fencing, hill country stabilisation and the like, wetland creation, increased compliance effort and where we've got hotspots or issues, more involvement for Tāngata whenua, more science and advocacy, and potentially subsidies for resource consent processes and reduction in rural rates and the like. Just aware of particularly the impact on rural landowners. So these are some of the options that we're looking for feedback on. That's me, but I'll see you again when we get into the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Justin. Thanks for that. All right. Sorry, I just wasn't quite sure whether we were live. So Our next speaker is Celia Witihira. Celia will be presenting on Te Mano me te Mauri o te Wai. Kia ora.
E mihi ana kia koe, Ruben, mo te whakaritinga o tēnei kaupapa o te rānei. E mihi ana kia koe, Justin, for your high-level overview on the draft freshwater plan change, its associated documents, and the drivers behind it. Ko Celia Witihira hai no Matarawa me Ahewhara Hopu Matua Tupuna, and I'm a member of the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, otherwise known as TWAG. First off, I'd like to talk to you about what I see as some of the challenges we face in terms of fresh water. From my personal perspective, and then I'd like to present some of the work that the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group has been doing and the key opportunities for Tāngata Whenua to provide feedback to the Northland Regional Council on their draft freshwater plan change and action plan. So let me share some of my personal thoughts on what the key challenges are. We have a legacy of colonisation and bad management decisions that have left our wai in a bad way. So not only do we have to change where, what and how we're farming, we also need to change how we make decisions about fresh water as well. And it's not small changes that are needed. As the ever-increasing effects of climate change are felt, with increasingly severe drought, storms and floods, increasing temperatures and sea levels, and more wildfires, the ability of our awa, roto and ripo to adapt to these changes is going to be critical. And we know that the healthier the ecosystem, the more resilient it will be to climate change. So it's not good news that our freshwater is in a bad state, and we don't have long to fix the situation, so that our waterways and our communities are healthy and as best positioned to deal with the increasing impacts of global warming as it can be. The Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, or TWAG, are a rōpū of kaitiaki and technicians from differing professional backgrounds who all whakapapa to Te Tai Tokero. TWAG was set up by the Regional Council in 2020 to provide advice to Council on what this new freshwater plan change might look like from a Tāngata Whenua perspective. We've developed recommendations as to what might go into the freshwater plan change from a Tāngata Whenua perspective as a platform, so that whānau, marae, hapu, and iwi can add their own perspectives and voices to that kōrero. This has been a sometimes challenging space to be in, particularly trying to weave together te ao Māori ways of viewing the world and one where economic imperatives are predominant. It has entailed a huge amount of sustained effort from TWAG members, and we hope that we've come up with what we have come up with provides a good basis for others to add their kōrero to. You can find all of our reports on the Council's Why It Matters webpage. We have been clear to Council that they need to support everyone to engage in this freshwater plan change mahi, and that our advice does not constitute consultation or engagement with Tāngata Whenua. We do not have a mandate to speak on behalf of anyone, and are providing our advice as individuals with expertise in this space. There are many values and issues of concern about the state of our freshwater that are common across Te Tai Tokero, but central to all our thinking is Te Hurihanga Wai. We've proposed for a statement as to what Te Mana o Te Wai means in Te Tai Tokero as a starting point for others to comment on. We've also come up with policies and objectives, attributes and targets that we hope others will think about and add to in their feedback to the Council, to NRC on the draft plan change. It's going to take time and it's going to take resources. The Freshwater Action Plan includes several actions that have been proposed by TWAG, including for council to work at a community level to define vision, values, and objectives at a local level that can build on the regional level approach taken so far. I want to highlight a few key aspects that we see as being fundamental. We need greater level of detail that can only come from council engaging with Tāngata whenua and communities at catchment level or hapori wai to define what their visions and values are for their wai. That is going to take resourcing and time. So it means that this needs to be funded through the long-term plan. The next is our recommendation for all wai to be given legal personhood. By that we mean that all water be treated with respect as a living entity with its own rights to be healthy and thrive. Council has agreed to do further work to look at what this means in practice and what options are available for appointing guardians to speak on behalf of wai. This is a key aspect in realigning the Western worldview that has treated rivers as water infrastructure resources to be utilised to a more balanced approach, acknowledging our Te Ao Māori worldview, where rivers are living entities and intertwined with our whenua and communities through whakapapa, and that they have a right to thrive. One of the key policies that we recommend that Council didn't put in the draft freshwater plan change, which is one that reserves an allocation of water for target use. They have instead put this in a separate consultation document. The policy basically sets aside 20% of any water that is being allocated for a specific purpose. These are for environmental enhancement, so restoration of wetland or creation of new wetlands, for example. Also for domestic use by papakainga and marae, and for use on Māori land. The final use is a catch-all, so any other use as long as it contributes to a fund. We haven't made any suggestions as to how much or exactly what that fund would be used for, but we know that in order to fix up our waterways, it's going to cost. And the question is, where is that money going to come from? We have proposed this as a mechanism by which those who are applying for consent to take water could contribute to a fund that can be used to help pay for wetland restoration, riparian planting, native forest restoration on highly erodible land that landowners are otherwise not going to be able to afford to do. We've proposed this targeted water allocation policy to ensure that there is an opportunity for development of Māori land, for which access to fresh water is essential. Northland's economy can benefit from Māori development, and enabling that to happen by reserving a portion of allocatable water will go a long way towards that. We really encourage feedback on our proposal and hope that Council will include the policy in the notified version of the plan change next year. The final aspect I'd like to highlight we're recommending increasing the activities which require cultural impact assessment to be done as part of a consent application process. Undertaking CIAs is one way in which Tāngata whenua can be involved in freshwater management. So we welcome feedback on whether requiring CIAs for the activities that the Council has included in the draft plan change might be effective, or whether there are other activities that should also require CIAs. We have an opportunity to influence what goes into the new freshwater plan rules for Te Tai Tokiro right now, to have a say in what the freshwater of the future will look like, and to make the changes we all need so that we have access to clean, healthy freshwater for sustainable livelihoods. We've got some excellent projects and initiatives happening. And this freshwater plan change can also support kaitiaki and communities on the ground whether it's to do monitoring or restoration and enhancement. And that's why the draft action plan is so critical, as that's where all the financing and resources that might allocate are set out. This is a step on a long journey, as we all know. So I do encourage everyone to get involved in this new freshwater plan change. Kia ora, and I hand it back to you, Ruben.
Tēnā koe, Celia, thank you for your kōrero. Just a quick reminder, we've got a Q&A section in our webinar today. So if you do have any questions, click on the Q&A button and please ask them. We've got some really good ones through already, and we have a panel on standby that will be available to answer those questions at the end of the next presentation. So our next presenter is Leon, and he's going to be getting into a bit of detail around these provisions. Kia ora, Leon.
Kia ora, Ruben. Thanks, everyone. My name is Leon Kiefer, Freshwater Policy Specialist here at Regional Council. Thanks to Justin and Celia, you should have a general idea of where Council sits within the whole plan change process and the reasoning behind the changes that we're currently looking at in our draft regional plan change. So what I want to get down to is how will this affect you as rural landowners, and what are the next steps? So just from a very high level, we're looking at new rules and policies that we're considering. As Justin mentioned, nothing has legal effect. We're still in the draft phase. Nothing is set in stone. A lot of this will change as a result of feedback coming from yourselves and your neighbors. There will be likely new resource consent requirements. So a lot of the rules that we're proposing, we're not seeking prohibition or banning of activities. We're just looking at ways that we can manage effects resulting from them. And one of those ways is through a resource consent pathway. These will result in some changes to how we use our land and water, and it will also have some financial implications. So hopefully we'll get into some detail around this, and really looking forward to answering some of the questions that you have, whether through this presentation or afterwards. So the draft rule changes that we're considering, protecting highly erodible land. So as a source of sediment, we need to figure out ways to manage how we prevent that sedimentation or any erosion from occurring. So one of the things that we've done is we've got more accurate maps using LiDAR technology rather than the old school geological maps. We're looking at limiting the amount of vegetation clearance at any one time on these highly erodible lands. And we're looking at some controls around land preparation, cultivation, and earthworks. And then, of course, we've got the discussion document around stock exclusion, which I'll go into more detail. Speaking of stock exclusion, keeping them out of waterways and wetlands. So we already have some provisions in the regional plan, and of course we have the national environmental standards from 2020, which require 3-meter setbacks on wide rivers, which is over 1 meter. We're also looking at encouraging plant growth along banks and margins, not requiring riparian planting, but we really need to figure out ways to improve that natural habitat within our waterways, as well as addressing erosion, sediment, and E. coli coming into the water. So elimination and reduction of wastewater discharges to water is part of the package as well. So we're looking at phasing this out over time. This is particularly relevant for dairy effluent discharges and municipal wastewater treatment plants. So we're looking at some tight controls around that. We'll get into more detail. Production land discharges also comes under this, which I'll go into more detail in a moment. Looking at further controls on exotic plantation forestry as well. So the National Environmental Standard for Commercial Forestry has just come into effect. So we do need to tweak our draft rules to better reflect what's in there. The timing didn't quite align. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done there. But the intent of our plan changes is to protect some of our more sensitive waterways, including our dune lakes. And as Celia touched on as well, looking at managing impacts on tangata whenua values, and part of that would be through either requiring some sort of cultural impact assessment, protecting inanga spawning areas, and also having that targeted water allocation policy. So touching on the reduction of sedimentation of our waterways and E. coli contamination, those highly erodible land and riparian setback discussion that we put forward, this is one of the really key tools that we're currently thinking about. Keep in mind, no rules around stock exclusion on those highly erodible land areas. It's really out for discussion. So what we've done is we've provided you with the raw data from that LiDAR. I'm showing you steep slopes, so that's 25 degrees and over. So this is what we're considering as highly erodible land. And we have a range of options out there. So we want to understand, what sort of livestock do we want to, think about managing when we're farming those slopes. We want to hear from you around options around riparian setbacks, what's workable, what's practicable. So we have a range there, 3, 5, 10-meter setbacks. And the document that we've put together, it does come with some high-level economic forecasting. Everything is averaged across the region. So we understand that every farm is different. Every farm will have existing status quo. You may have already done a whole lot of work. Some farms haven't done anything. Everybody is unique, and we're really just trying to work from a region-wide approach to get the best bang for our buck. So looking forward to lots of robust discussion at the end of this presentation from the audience on this one. So in that document, we've provided high-level table cost benefits of riparian setbacks. So in short, the bigger the riparian setback, the more environmental benefits that we get. So, we're looking at filtering runoff with sediment. Having stock further away helps reduce the amount of E. coli contamination, and also having a water setback allows for more different types of biodiversity. So you might have tall woody vegetation forming a canopy over the stream. You might have some grass that's grazed over the fence along the riparian boundary. So there are all sorts of different things that we're considering in this. Again, it's up for discussion. We have some high-level financials in that right-hand column, and we recognize that it is expensive. Everybody knows that fencing is time-consuming. You lose some productive land as well, so that is not lost on us. And we also have created a new map viewer. So on the screen is an example property on the East Coast in Whangarei district. So we have, you can see the light blue line that shows your stream or overland flow. Most of it is probably a stream. And the yellow shading is showing you land that has 25 to 35 degree slope. The red is over 35 degree slope. To give you an idea, if you're unfamiliar with this sort of topography, the yellow shading is very difficult to walk straight up. Stock typically don't walk straight up it either. They'll kind of do a zigzag, or as they graze, they form these sort of terraces. So you'll actually see this level of resolution in the LiDAR will show you where those terraces are. The red slope is over 35 degrees. You can't really walk up this. This is scrambling and climbing. So where it's shown in the paddocks, that's where the land has really been terraced down from continual stock grazing. Land preparation and cultivation, of course, the land preparation is defined by disturbing earth by machinery. So, if you're out there with a hoe, don't worry about it. But if you're out there with a tractor and a cultivator, this would apply to you. Difficult already to do this on highly erodible land. So we're looking at controlling that, but also some setbacks from some of our rivers. So that's 10 meters from a lake or river, or 20 meters from an outstanding river. can't say that, we're not saying that you can't do it. We just want to have some management in place. So that's a resource consent pathway. Of course, with everything, freshwater farm plans are not off the table. We haven't really gone into a lot of detail in the draft rules, just because there's just so much to consider. Freshwater farm plans is a different set of regulations with a different means of auditing, application, etc. So really the two need to talk to each other. This is all part of the process. So we really want your feedback on what we've put out there, as well as what you think should work. And freshwater farm plans might be one of those ways to complement a resource consent pathway. The earthworks, we've changed the definitions a little bit to help align with what we're now calling highly erodible land. Prior, it was erosion-prone land, and it was, sort of based on some high-level modeling that didn't really apply down to the farm scale. And we're also looking at including further controls around earthworks within outstanding freshwater bodies and dune lakes. So that's reflected through this plan change. I won't go into too much detail here, just in the interest of time. Vegetation clearance as well. So while we are looking at controls around pasture, grazing, etc., we also are looking at vegetation clearance controls. So riparian clearance, the rules, they will apply to plantation forests that are planted after the 1st of January 2027. That's recognizing some plantation forests that are soon to be harvested. So the rules wouldn't necessarily apply to them if they were notified. So we're looking at having controls around clearing vegetation in riparian margins. That's really to protect that ecosystem habitat and sedimentation risk along those riparian areas. And we're also looking at controls around clear-cut harvesting. So we're saying that up to 40 hectares is permitted within a 12-month period if 75% of your highly erodible land remains in woody vegetation. So we're recognizing the effects that occurred post-cyclone Gabrielle, where you saw clear-cut forest resulting in pretty horrendous sedimentation of rivers and waterways in Northland, as well as around the country, particularly on the East Coast there. Again, there is a consenting pathway. So if you have all sorts of management methods in place and council's happy with that, then you should be able to get a resource consent. Similarly, we're looking at controls around afforestation. We recognize that afforestation is more appropriate in certain areas than others. So within catchments of our dune lakes particularly, and within 10 meters of other lakes and intermittent rivers, we understand that pine plantations in particular have changes to the hydrology, so groundwater availability, surface water runoff, etc. So maintaining natural water levels in those water bodies, lakes, really important for our ecosystem health. So we do have some controls around that. And discharges to water, we do want to phase out direct discharge of wastewater to water. So that's treated or untreated. So we're saying that if you've got domestic wastewater, say a septic system, you cannot discharge it treated or untreated to water, where septic systems either have to be pumped out or discharged to land, so land application. Municipal wastewater treatment plants, so those are the big town ones. New discharges to water will be prohibited. We recognize that there are a couple municipal wastewater treatment plants that do discharge treated wastewater to freshwater. So renewals for that will be non-complying, which will be quite a rigorous consent application process for them. Farm wastewater discharges are probably more pertinent to this audience. So if you have an existing irrigation scheme to land that is currently permitted. We're looking at moving that to a controlled activity, which would require a resource consent. Council cannot decline a controlled activity, but the purpose of this is to provide some assurity to regional council that we can at least maintain our existing water quality in the region. The policy statement requires us to improve, so our hands are sort of tied in how we can do this. So freshwater farm plans might come into play here. We're not yet sure. So we just need your feedback on this one. And then if you have an existing, so dairy effluent discharge to water, we are looking at enabling you to renew that application until the January 2030. After that, you'll need to have a discharge to land, and that would be a discretionary activity, just so we get a surety that the new system will work as designed and that it's appropriate in certain areas. And Celia did talk to the targeted water allocation policy. So this slide I'm putting up here, this is a recorded presentation. So this is sort of a numerical graphical representation if your brain works better in this space. So basically what we're saying is, if there is existing flow available in a catchment, 20% of that would be reserved by this targeted policy. If you're in a catchment that's fully allocated, or you have a resource consent to take water, that's not affected. So we're not taking water away from existing takes. We're not taking water away from existing allocations. It's only if you're in a catchment with surface water that has some flows available for resource consent. So if we go forward with this policy on the date of notification, it would effectively reserve that 20% for cultural and environmental enhancement. A lot of work to be done on this one as well. So we talk about sort of financial contributions in the discussion document. We haven't worked out the kinks. We haven't worked out a lot of the practicalities in this. So really, we want to hear your feedback on this policy. Take-home messages real quick. We're not banning anything unless it's wastewater discharges to water. Everything that we're looking at does have a pathway if you get a resource consent and you manage the effects. So it really is just regional council has this statutory requirement to manage our resources and to improve on all of the freshwater values and attributes that Justin and Celia talked through earlier. So this is just part of the toolkit. Other ways that we're going to be doing that, as mentioned before, we have our draft NRC action plan. So a lot of things that we need to do, not just the stick approach, but also some carrots. This all needs to be worked out. It's a democratic process as well. So if there are things out there that would work for you and you'd really get on board with, please do write it down, send it in that feedback form. Feedback is useful. And your timeline. So 4th of March is the end of our consultation period. So the Dargaville Northland Field Days is our final event, and we've got some more things, online hui, in-person meetings, etc., planned. So if all goes according to the current plan, we're looking at late 2024 having a proposed plan change notified. Things are changing, so let's not hold us to this timeline, but this is what we're currently working towards. And that's it. So whyitmatters.nz is our website. I'm sure you've been there already, but a lot of information there. So please go see that and ask us questions. Thanks, Ruben. That's me for now.
Thank you very much, Leon. Great stuff. So we've got a bunch of questions. So just for your information, for those online, we've got a series of questions that have been asked during the presentation, but we also have some questions that were asked by those who registered as well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to work through those. You've got us until about 1 o'clock. So we've got about 35 minutes of question time. So hopefully we can get through the majority of the questions, and those that we don't get through, we will be putting up on our website to make sure that we're covering off everything that's been asked today. While we're going through these questions, I'm sure others will pop into your head, so feel free to put them down. Like I said, we'll do our best to answer them, and those that we don't answer, we will answer at a later date. I'm going to put my first question to our two elected members, Marty and John, and followed by that, I'll hand over to Celia to also answer. So this is just a very broad question to you, Marty, to start off with. Is it worth getting involved in the process?
In a nutshell, yes, definitely. We really need people's input. This is not us telling everybody what to do. This is going fishing for ideas as how to achieve fresh water while also having economic and activities on land, both economic, food growing, and employment. So there's some broad brush suggestions of, should we have 3 metre fencing? Should we have 5 metre fencing, 10 metre fencing? And how is it achievable? So we want your ideas. Yes, please.
Thank you, Marty. John, your thoughts?
Oh, to answer that question, yes. Thanks, Ruben. Yes, we've seen a lot of changes in the last year. You've got 9 councillors. What's happened the last week? We've still got the 9 councillors, so that hasn't really changed much. Some have changed portfolios, and we've got a new chairman. That doesn't take away from this process whatsoever. Having a new government will have implications on how we go forward in the future. But as Marty said, this is just a draft. We need your ideas. And I'll give you one that came out this week from my neighbour who's selling his farm. He said he hasn't fenced off his waterways, but he said by putting a water trough in there, his animals don't go into the water. So the point was, is the fence more important, or was the water trough more important? And those are sort of things we want feedback on, how it's going to affect you, and also your feedback if you had sort of positive stuff towards it on what you think would work better in this plan. We do want to hear from you. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Good, John. Celia.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. So really, from my perspective, this is our opportunity as communities, whānau, Māori landowners, marae, hapu, iwi, to participate in the drafting stage before it goes through that formal process and it becomes a lot harder. This is our where we can actually look at what's been written in the draft and go, is this going to work for us? Or is there a way of writing it better, or are there better rules, policies, or incentives out there that need to be incorporated? So as community members and iwi hapu whānau landowners, this is our chance to actually, a chance that we haven't had in a long time, and I'm not sure if we'll ever get again, to actually help make sure what's written is going to work for Tai Tokiro. Regardless of what central government is up to, the current state of our waterways is not okay. And as communities and iwi hapu whānau, the process that council is working to is a process that we can actually participate in. Yeah, kia ora.
Good, Celia. All right, so I've got a really good question here, which I'm going to hand over to Justin to answer the first part of it. And then the second part, I'm actually going to hand over to our two elected members. So the first part of it is about the government confirming that the MBEA is going to be repealed within the first 100 days. And the second part of it, which I'll hand over to Marty first and then John, is about how the change within council and whether or not that's going to affect the direction of the draft plan. So first one is about, is the MBA going to change anything, or the repeal of that going to change anything in respect of this process?
Thanks, Ruben. Short answer, no. The MPS Freshwater was established under the Resource Management Act, not the MBA. So that said, the government is also, new government coalition agreements have also signalled the MPS might get replaced, but not sure when, not sure what with. So as far as it stands at the moment, it's still in play.
Kia ora. So thanks, Justin. So I'm going to ask John to answer this first, because you did touch on it in your earlier kōrero. So you mentioned that there's been some changes within council, and the question is, are those changes likely to change the direction of the draft plan?
Well, this is a draft plan, so there were going to be changes anyway, I expect. There is a change of direction. Yes, we've got a new chair, Jeff Crawford, who is a farmer. And then I've been asked to take on the water side of things as well. So there you've got two farmers. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know. But we do walk the talk, and we do understand water, and we do understand the impact on rural New Zealand. So I think it's a positive way we're going forward at the moment, and we will take into account all the ramifications from these new rules that are coming out. And I see there's a question further down asking about the financial impacts. Won't get into that quite yet, but yes, I think it's positive. I think we're going ahead, and we are going to listen to all your submissions, and we will take into account that. So that's why I encourage you to submit on this. So thank you, Ruben.
Thank you, John. Marty. You're just on mute, Marty, sorry.
Oh gosh, I hope people can lip read. Thanks for that. Changes of government aside, we have a responsibility to land users and also the beneficiaries of clean water. Clean water for drinking, swimming, food gathering, and the river dwellers, eels, watercress, invertebrates, insects, shellfish, and those that eat them. So how can we achieve that? We know water quality is suffering from weather events, but also land use practices, forestry, roading, farming, cropping, horticulture, urban development, sewage plants. Some we can't prevent. We can't prevent erosion, but we can moderate or work together with our human activities to have good land use practices and also able to use that water. Land use is becoming more intensive. So how do we best support food production and economic activity, yet protect that most precious resource? So, as I say, government change aside, even change of how the council is operating, there's still a need for fresh water. So how do we achieve that? So input, please. Thanks.
Kia ora, Marty. Thank you for that. All right, my next question is going to be handed to you, Justin, and this relates to the maps. And those online probably would have seen that there were some dates on the maps that are slightly further back than our current date. And so the question is, how current are the maps that we've been using that we presented regarding the sediment attribute slide?
Yeah, that's a good question. So essentially, the MPS freshwater requires that we set out a baseline state for the attributes that we're required to monitor and manage. We needed that baseline state to start developing the draft for freshwater plan change, as we started that a couple of years ago. We also need a sample size that we have confidence in. So you need sort of 4 to 5 years data before you can actually have any confidence on what it's saying. So that's essentially why we have those. We've used the 2015, 2019 data set to establish the baseline state. And that was to inform where are we when we started on this process. But we will be updating that as we go, looking for trends, looking for how fast improvements are occurring. So that picture can be updated regularly.
Good, Justin. Stay online. I'm going to hand you with another question. So we've actually got a couple of questions, and I'm going to bundle them together. So the first question is around the level of work that we've done to understand the economic implications of the various proposed levels of stock exclusion. And there's a similar question which relates to the loss of production land around the 10-metre riparian strip and the potential exclusion of stock from those steeper slopes. So if you could just get into a bit of detail around how we've assessed the economic impacts of those draft provisions.
Yeah, sure. So with the consultation document on the stock exclusion provisions and options, there's a costing report that sets out estimates for each of the scenarios. It looks at individual farms. I think it does dairy and sheep and beef from memory, and looks at, and Leon covered on this, touched on it briefly, but it looks at sort of average costs for an average farm over a 30-year period. It looks at the cost of fencing, reticulating water, if those water bodies relied on stock access, relied on for drinking water, and it looked at opportunity costs as well. It also looked at some of the alternative uses, like potentially if you were to go to, say, pine forest, for example, or natives. So, but what we haven't done is done that at a macro scale for the region. So we haven't agglomerated all that up and gone, okay, the impact on the farming sector across Northland would be X. That's really tricky to do, because we don't have all the data on what each individual farm circumstances are going to be different, their viability or feasibility, their financial returns, the profit they make on each hectare of land is going to be different, how much highly rateable land they've got, how much waterways they've got through their property, and the like, all quite variable and unique. But yeah, just note that, again, council hasn't landed any rules. So for stock exclusion, for example, so we don't have a firm set of rules to test on, but we made some our educated guess around the cost estimates for individual farms as part of this exercise to help inform feedback. Just note that if we go into the next formal stage, there is a requirement to have a sort of cost benefit analysis, what they call a Section 32 evaluation, that looks a bit further into impacts, and we may expand on the detail and perhaps try and extrapolate what it means for sectors, depending on what the rules look like, of course.
Kia ora, Justin, thank you for that. All right, Celia, I'm going to hand this to you. So, and completely bearing in mind that the feedback from the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group has been at a regional scale. So this is just relating to a question around your kōrero around cultural impact assessments, and what was the thinking around how those would be carried out and who would be conducting them?
From the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, when we put that recommendation in, or it was in the policy section, it was about allowing marae hapu to have a voice in the use of water within their areas. So from our perspective, it was to be done by the local people in the local area, the tangata whenua from that local area. And we know that potentially could be a lot of work. We also understand that our whānau are doing this work already. And so there still needs to be things nutted out around this concept in terms of, how that will take place and who pays and things like that. So there's still some thinking to be done around it, but basically we envision that it will be from the tangata whenua within the local area that the consent may apply to. Kia ora.
Thank you, Celia. Kia ora. All right, we're going to head to Leon with this one. This is a question that was asked at the point of registration. So this is about expectations around fencing. And so the question is, if a landowner already has their fence or their waterway with stock exclusion in place, what's the thinking around how any provisions that are put in place requiring stock exclusion, how would that play out? And would landowners have to change the location of those fences straight away?
Yeah, good question. So, we haven't drafted any rules around this, and this, it's not a black and white issue. So for farmers and landowners who have already fenced off their streams, let's say we land on a 5-meter setback, and you've got an average of 3, something like that. We're not going to say you're non-compliant, here's an abatement notice, move your fence or else. That's not the intention. Really, the intention is to introduce an acceptable standard, if you will, where any new fences or replacement fences are aiming to achieve that. So if you've got a brand new fence, or even if you have a really good fence that does the job of keeping your stock out, we wouldn't be looking at an immediate uplift of that fence to move it to meet the new rule. You know, this could be something that goes into a freshwater farm plan, or, you know, if you've got production, dairy, effluent, etc., resource consent, you know, we can capture it that way as well. But if you've got a fenced off stream and it's doing the job, there's no need to punish you for it. But if in the future one day we do land on a rule and you decide to upgrade or move a fence or replace a fence, we'd probably be looking at making sure it does meet that rule. But as I said, there is no rule as of yet. We're still in the consultation stage, so this sort of information is really good. We just recognize that there are a lot of streams in Northland that do not have fences, and that's really what we're looking at.
Nice one, Leon. So I'm going to ask you another question, seeing as you're still here. So this is about the provisions in the plan, in the draft plan, where we've suggested restricting the amount of wastewater discharges to water, particularly on the municipal systems. So the question is around the alternatives, and so are we implying that land application is the preferred method going forward?
Potentially, and you know, that presents a lot of other challenges as well. The topography in Northland doesn't always lend itself to large-scale land application, especially if we're looking at everything going to land-based application. We'll be losing sites as a result. But the feedback that we've heard, especially from Tāngata Whenua, is that wastewater discharge to water is just culturally abhorrent. So there are some municipal treatment plants in Northland that are currently investigating this. You know, so there are a couple in the far north. Taipa is one that springs to mind, where they've currently got their resource consent, and they're discharging it to I think it's a sandy golf course system, and I think they were looking at that at Mangawhai, they're looking at that at Ruakaka. So a lot of clever minds looking at the feasibility and how this can be done. We know that it can be done. Obviously, it's just not what has been done. So there's still a lot of work to investigate the best way of doing that.
Yeah, nice. Okay, our next question is around a really key component to achieving freshwater quality, and that's not around regulation, it's around supporting behaviour change and incentivisation. And so I'm going to ask Justin to respond to this, but then I'm going to also hand over to Councillor Blackwell to talk about the thinking that's gone into supporting behaviour change within our rural community. So the question is around the role of incentivisation, and I guess that links back to the action plans that we're seeking feedback on in return in terms of achieving setbacks or stock exclusion.
Yep. And as we've mentioned, rules can do a lot, but they can only go so far. And the other side of the equation is behaviour change and incentives for that. So Council has set out some options in the draft action plan. Council does currently have an environment fund that supports things like fencing, riparian planting, wetland creation and the like. The scale of the ask, though, is quite significant, and Council, obviously in Northland, we've got a small rating base. We don't have unlimited funds, unfortunately. We're lucky to have the Kaipara Moana remediation program as a good model for getting good water quality outcomes in Northland, but that doesn't extend across the rest of the region. So there's a good 50-50 sort of model there around sharing costs. Whether we can do that for the rest of Northland, that's a big ask for Council. There's government money available for some of this, or has been at least in the past. I'd like to think there's more to come, given the scale of the issue we're facing in Northland. But yeah, incentives are a big big part of the picture, and council, I think, has put a lot of emphasis on trying to provide those to date. So
Thanks,
over to
Justin.
councillors.
Yeah, nice. Councillor Blackwell, interested in your thoughts around the role of incentivisation and I guess council's thinking around the other part of this, which isn't just about regulation, it's about supporting change.
Thank you, Ruben. Yes, important part of it. In my past role, I've been chairman of the Sheep and Beef Council for Northland, and a lot of it was by demonstration. So farmers learn particularly well, or land users, particularly well by seeing what's happening in their own area and demonstrators. So Beef and Lamb have done a great job in the past with all sorts of different subjects. A stick and a carrot. Well, farmers seem to go a lot better with a carrot than a stick. And when you get the stick sort of coming out, there will be quite a lot of pushback because a lot of these farmers have got financial issues. We know iwi farmers up in the far north. I was up there the last council meeting before last, and seeing how poor things are up there. They're struggling. They haven't got their gorse under control. Their fences aren't done. So asking for this to come on top of them is probably a big ask. One thing we can do, though, is push out the date line, and I believe this government has just come and may look at that in the future, is that if we can push back the timeline that you have to change your fence, or when you fence your waterways off, that would be probably helpful as well. I'm thinking that we've done similar things in the past, but this is huge. This is going to have a big impact on Northland's economy. When I look at the roughly 25,000 hectares of land above the 25-degree angle, I suspect I've seen some figures that may pull about $250 million out of the Northland economy. So the rules we make are easy to do. It's knowing the ramifications in the future that's really hard. And a good example was putakawa trees. I love trees. Putakawa trees are a great tree, but they made a rule that you can't prune them if you have them within 200 metres of the coast. Well, who would have thought no garden was going to plant putakawa trees 200 metres from the coast? So sometimes these rules and regulations, we put this draft out, but we need to know the ramifications of all those rules, and hopefully that's what you'll be doing and telling us. Thank you. Thank you, Ruben.
Thanks, John. That's a great segue to my next question, which I'm going to hand over to Justin. And this is a follow-up question based on your earlier response, Justin, regarding the financial impacts. And so the question really is around the extent to which we know the potential economic impacts, and the question is around sort of quantifying the impacts on jobs and the impacts on export values, basically our GDP. And what are our next steps from this point on to better understand those impacts?
Yeah, it can be quite tricky. But I think as we go into that sort of our cost benefit assessment, once there's sort of rules confirmed and we can then model what the opportunity cost of the lost area of grazing, for example, cost of reticulation, we may be able to extend that to a macro level and look at, well, our return from this part of the primary sector is X. We think we might lose X percent productivity in terms of our regional GDP from that slice of our sector. So we may be able to extend that up. We've got an in-house economist who's pretty good at this sort of thing. There's also potential models or templates we can follow that the government uses around this. But yeah, it really depends on confirming what the rule is before we can actually take that the next step. But I think we can do something. I'm not the economist, however, so I can't be absolutely confident what it might look like, but certainly go into more detail on what we've got current. Yeah.
Thanks, Justin. I'm just going to invite Councillor Marty Robinson to provide his thoughts around this kaupapa.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ruben, and thanks, John, also for putting forward the challenges that we will face as a region. I'd like to add, it's not necessarily taking land out of production. There are incentives for the fencing. For instance, there could be the ability to have a QE2 application, QE2 trust that will actually assist with fencing off if it is going to be putting it into a reserve, I suppose, that area of land that is supposedly taken out of production, or there are changing land uses on that side of the fence, between the fence and the creek, that could be economically viable, or not only economically viable, but potentially give more income, such as honey production or tree crops, or even the ability to fence off that area, but to coppice willows for food, or harvest grass for food. So just imaginative thinking. Don't say it's necessarily taking land out of production. Let's see what there is a better land use between that interface between land production and the water. Cheers.
Yeah, kia ora, Marty. All right, we've got about 8 minutes to go. We've still got quite a few questions, but we're going to try and power through them. Really, really good questions. And we really appreciate people taking the time to stick around and ask their questions and hear our responses. So I'm going to hand this one to you, Leon. This is a really good question around E. coli. And the crux of the question is, how do we go about measuring E. coli? And there's another component there around the fact that E. coli is sort of sourced from all warm bodied animals. And so how do we know that the E. coli is coming from the sources that through the draft plan change we're seeking to provide some controls over?
Yeah, so E. coli is unfortunately the unelected representative of pathogenic bacteria. So it's an indicator species. So it's not the only thing that causes us to get sick, but it is something that does cause us to be sick. We've all got E. coli living in our gut. It's not all bad. But when it does come from another animal, or if it is a pathogenic strain, it does cause illnesses. So E. coli is just one bacteria that causes it, and it is a good indicator species because we know how to cultivate it. We know that it does come from intestinal tracts of warm-blooded animals. We know that it doesn't just come from livestock, so it comes from humans. It comes from rats, mice, stoats. It comes from birds, but we also know that, and Councillor Blackwell could correct me on this, but there's a few thousand head of cattle in Northland, maybe a few 100,000 head of cattle in Northland, and maybe a couple 100,000 sheep as well. So that's that's a lot of fecal matter, which is landing within our waterway catchment. So we are able to not only measure E. coli, but also trace it back to different species, and our data does show that most of it is coming from ruminants, which are those grazing mammals. So it's an indicator species that we use to not necessarily show at any given time how dangerous it is to swim, but we do have trends where we see different rivers and different monitoring sites being subject to contamination, fecal runoff from areas, and we can see what's happening in that catchment as well. So it's hopefully it's complicated, but it's also real simple when you get down to you're just measuring bugs, bacteria on an agar plate, but it does give us a good idea.
Thank you, Leon. Nice one. All right, Justin, you're up. I've got 2 questions for you. So I'm going to ask the first one, and then I've got a follow-up question, which is linked to it. So this relates to our maps identifying our slope classes, where we've put together some potential provisions around how you could manage that through stock exclusion. And so the question is around, within those maps, we've got the red and the yellow areas. How much of those red and yellow areas do we know are covered by native forest and plantation forestry versus pasture?
Oh, put me on the spot there.
Approximately.
Yeah, approximately. We know the land above 35 degrees, as you might imagine, is largely already in woody vegetation, because most people have recognised it's got limited value in terms of grazing or what have you. So about 10% of that is in pasture. So I think overall across the region, there's about 92,000 hectares of land over 35 degrees. So about 9 to 10,000 hectares of that is in pasture. The land between 25 to 35, I can't remember, but I think it was around the maybe 30 to 40% in pasture. Again, I think people have recognised that's not ideal for grass and have gone either let it revert or stay in native or go to a sort of tree crop, pine, what have you. I don't quote me on those figures. I'm just working off the top of my head.
Yeah, nice one. We'll make sure we can cover that off in our fact section anyway. All right, so the follow-up component to that question is the slope maps. Are we able to calculate the area of land that on a property by property basis that's subject to that those slope maps?
Yeah, we have got figures on the area across Northland. We haven't done it property by property. Just want to say that this is raw data. This is LiDAR data. It's incredibly fine scaled, and we've got some opportunities to refine this, the layers, i.e. we could take out the smaller little pixelated pieces. The other option we've got to say for landowners in terms of stock exclusion, we could say, okay, provide the flexibility. For land over 35 degrees, we'd like to see, say, 80% of the area excluded from stock. And again, it's not an absolute prohibition. Most rules will have a consent pathway. So if you want to graze it, you can't at all. There's just a process to go through and consenting regime. But yes, when we get down to it, we can identify the areas covered by each of these slope classes.
Yeah, good one, Justin. So I'm going to pester you again with another question. I'm sorry, but while you're here, all right. So this relates to the 40 hectare rule that we've got. Well, it's referred to as a 40 hectare rule by the person who's asked the question. So,
Yep.
So the question is around what are we trying to achieve with that draft provision, and what sorts of considerations have been given to the impacts of that on the forestry sector. And we'll make this our last question, our last response, then we'll close with a karakia, and any other questions we haven't answered, we'll make sure we cover off online.
Yep. Yeah, good question. Again, the idea behind that sort of 40 hectare limit, if you like, or threshold, is, again, it's not a prohibition. If you go over 40 hectares or you have less than 75% woody cover across the highly erodible land, there's a consent process. But we were aware of what happened down on the east coast of the North Island, and some of the recommendations that come out of there about limiting the scale of clearfell harvest, particularly on this highly erodible stuff. Woody vegetation, retaining that on these steep slopes is a key to mitigating or limiting the erosion and the sediment loss to waterways. So I think there's a good rationale to control that size. People can go over it. The forestry industry will likely do that. They tend to find it more efficient to harvest at scale. But we'd like to see a process to go through before that happens. So a consent would be required if this rule progresses. If you go over 40 hectares or you got less than 75% cover, that would look at what are the sensitivities around the harvest activity, what's at risk downstream in terms of slips or sediment losses, the drinking water takes below it, swimming sites, mahinga sites, whatever it might be. And it can fine tune. And so it might say, okay, that slope there, it's very steep, it looks unstable. We want to see a wider riparian setback, or at least a more staged approach than this bit over here, which might be fine. Or it might be about the harvest method, how it's done, more sensitive approaches and the like. But again, it's not an absolute prohibition.
Thanks, Justin. All right, so we're going to close off from there. I just want to say thank you very much to our panel, and thank you very much to our presenters. And most of all, I would really like to thank those who attended online to listen in and participate in the discussions. And just by way of a take home, you know, our council needs to find some solutions to manage our waterways that work with communities, work with farmers, work with tangata whenua, and work for our waterways. The process to achieve that is by hearing from our community. And so I really would like to thank you for your participation. And also I would really like to invite you to provide feedback and enable us to consider that as we continue on this journey to supporting better water quality outcomes for the Northland region. All right, so we're going to close off with a karakia and look forward to hearing all your feedback. Kia inoi tātou. Unahia, unahia. Unahia ki te urutapu nui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara tangata. Ko ia rā I rongo. Whakairia ake ki runga. Kia tina. Hui e, tā ki e. Thank you, everyone.